I'm Rene Mullen, and this is Pen and Poet. Intimate conversations and performances with poets, both page and stage, established and up-and-coming. A safe space where you can meet new artists, maybe gain an appreciation for the spoken and written word. This is poetry for the rest of us, the reachable, understandable, digestible poetry.
That night, Zapata washed my feet. Handlebar whiskers scratched the itch between my legs like myth.
On the days of our births, we breathe the dust of these memories, and it scours our flesh, smooths our skins, fills our lungs.
All the dead desire most is to live in our memory. All they desire most is to laugh and to dance.
I'm here with my guest, Jules Nyquist. Jules earned her MFA in Writing and Literature from Bennington College in Vermont in 2007, is the founder of Jules Poetry Playhouse LLC in Albuquerque, where she hosts poets and conducts workshops and classes. She is author of Behind the Volcanoes and Appetites, as well as Homesick Then, which we will be talking about at length. Her poetry is featured in countless publications and is the co-editor of the Poets Speak Anthology series. And Jules, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much, Rene. I'm happy to be here.
Yay, excellent. And so, as with everybody, so that everybody can kind of get to know you, start with a poem of two of yours, your choice to read for us.
Well, I can read the poem that I just wrote about 5 minutes ago with your little exercise.
That we're actually going to share at the very end.
Oh, okay.
Kind of bookend it.
That's kind of good, though. You get the creative juices going right away.
Yay, I'm glad.
So, well, I'm going to read what I usually read from my latest book called Homesick Then. And this is a unique poem because, well, it's a prose poem. It's all in like 3 paragraphs. And it also has appeared in all 3 of my books. And, of course, if I can find the page number on it.
Would it be Horizons?
Yes.
28.
So if anybody has the book Homesick, then they can follow along.
That would be awesome.
Okay, Horizons. And this poem is for my grandmother. I dreamed you cut your hair, your neck white and smooth, says the new life will be easier. The necklace would have been best kept under glass. Turquoise stones circle your neck. The travel brochure mentions silence 3 times. You ask the devil for a new type of bondage. The tortoise encounters your hidden grave. Why do I see it now, hidden from view for over 60 years? They pray for you. Carpenters keep hammering. You close your eyes. A man climbs up on the roof. A woman disappears into thin air. You say a spell upon waking. Horizons keep rising every 24 hours. Your exposed skin can be touched only in circles. The tortoise buries herself in the sand. Don't feel pity. Name the stones on your neck instead. Touch them in the dark. What do I say when I see your empty shell on the beach? I squeeze your hand. They've made you into a bowl, turned you upside down, hung you on the wall.
Yay, thank you. Now, I'll admit most of the poets that I've had on the show so far, but not all, have been performance poets, because that's kind of where I cut my teeth, and I'm actually really new to poetry. And I've known you since I started my poetry just a few years ago, but you've scared me because you're not only a traditional poet, which I have tended not to understand, but also because you're so well known here in town that I was nervous to have you on. But after reading this, I have to say, yeah, you're a traditional poet, but it's so readable, and I can tell that most of these have very specific forms. So I'm curious, coming from kind of an academic side of poetry, if that is part of what you think of when you're writing poetry, or is it just kind of the type of poetry you piece together, how that plays out?
Yeah, and I've always written poems. Like back in junior high, I was writing in my journal and writing poems, and I had a English teacher in 7th or 8th grade that kind of encouraged me, and that's awesome. It's always just been the observation. I do not have an English degree, so I'm not as well read as some of these people with like a master's and doctorate in English and all that. I went to grad school later in life, like 20 years after high school, and so I did not do I worked a lot and had odd jobs before I got my undergrad, and then I got my master's. But I still, there's that academic part of it, but a lot of it's telling stories, and my stuff is very narrative, and a lot of poems I write it's storytelling in a way. And I think of myself as more of a performance and page poet, but I'm not a slam poet, and I'm more just wanting to relate to the audience, and I like to see things. I think it should be good where you can read it on the page, but then you can also hear it and have that story.
And that's awesome, because it was actually, I think it was, it was Rich Boucher I had on, and I used to keep saying, well, this poem is a slam poem, and he kind of pointed out to me that it's not really a slam poem. It could be, but it's much more of a performance poem. Like slam is a competition, so I can see that, and so I was hesitant because I was scared that I wouldn't understand your poetry, but I'm so happy that it's readable, and it's still, a lot of them are still very form oriented, so it's kind of the best of both worlds. So it makes me
good.
Really happy. And I have to say that I actually went through college the same way. I took like 5 or 6 years off, and I think you tend to treat your college years a little differently when you take some time off in between. In between.
And you come from a different place. You've got more life experience.
Yeah.
You're not just right out of high school. And I never really had anybody encourage me to go to college. I was pretty much the first person in my family to get an undergrad degree, and nobody I really knew, except one of my cousins had a master's. So I was kind of paving new ground, and so I didn't have a lot of mentors that way. And then I just started hanging out with the poets, and I've worked with different places that have poetry, but it was a very much learning experience, and I think you get exposed to all kinds of poetry, and I just say read everything and listen to everything, and you'll find out what you like.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And
this poem has actually been set to music. If you go to my website, which is julesnyquist.com, there's some audio poems on there. And I have a friend, Alicia Alton, who plays viola, and so we recorded it once and had the music in the background. This poem has been performed on stage with a couple of friends of mine doing these things with like scarves and masks and different things like that. Yeah. So that's kind of another way of performing it. And it's actually been kind of different variations of stage on here too. So it's really interesting how you can do that.
And I'm glad when people self-promote their stuff on the show, because I tend to forget to ask for those sorts of details. So yay. And of course, I'll put all that in the liner notes and all the fancy stuff as well, so people can just click links.
Right.
Let's see. So on that, I suppose we should just jump into about your most recent book and the one that I have and the one you have in front of you, Homesick, then. And I suppose it was one of my later questions, but I'll start with it. The title. It seemed like a strange title until I actually read the piece that it's based off of, and I was curious if you could kind of talk about what at least the title itself kind of stands for. And
I always think the hardest part of a book sometimes is coming up with the title. And this one happens to be the title of a poem, although, I mean, it wouldn't have to be. But it's also about home, and this book is it's a journey that kind of came full circle. It's about the life and death of my parents from my point of view as a daughter. And it's also about my family history, where my grandmother on my mom's side died very young at age 26 of domestic violence back in the 30s, so it was very different back then when my mom was 4. So I've always had this family history kind of haunting me and trying to write about it. And so I first wrote the poems about caretaking my dad when they lived in Missouri and out of state, and then he came to Albuquerque to live with me and was in bad health, and I was caretaking him, and he died here in 2014. My mom preceded him in death in about 6 months previous, so I had all this stuff just kind of snowballing on me. And it took a couple of years to just kind of even think about it, but I was just journaling during some of that time, and then I started writing poems a couple of years later, and then so I had the part of it with their caretaking them and that death experience, and then it needed something else, and I thought, why not start it when they were born and how they met, and then my grandmother and how that whole thing fits in. So it kind of came full circle that way. So Homesick is a way of kind of finding your place in things. And it's also, this is set in different places. I'm from Minnesota originally, so it's got that Minnesota growing up, from my poems from my point of view. And then also my grandmother was buried in Fort Madison, Iowa, which is very southern Iowa. So that kind of started her journey in how they got to St. Paul. And then my parents retired in southern Missouri, and then my dad's grandfather originally is from Sweden, and then there's Albuquerque. So it's got this mix of places. So it's also about place a lot.
Yeah.
So it's finding that place.
Awesome. And so, let's see, because I had a bunch of questions relative to some of the poems. I have to say, I didn't expect it to, but it all kind of reads. Yeah, it very much reads as a memoir, kind of like a story from start to finish. There was a lot of moments where I felt a little heartbroken for you, and so.
Yeah, it's a sad story in a way, and it's a poetic memoir, and I put the poems in order of kind of like you can read them in order from front to back, like you would a novel.
I like it.
But it's also very healing, and I'm going on a book tour, so by the time you air this, it'll probably be over with, but I'm going back to Minnesota for a week in early May, and reading a lot of these poems, and and seeing my brother and some my poet friends there, and some of my parents' friends, and I've given this book to some of my parents' friends who knew my parents and my family, so it's out there, and they've really liked it. I think it's a healing process in a way as well. And it's a healing process for me too.
So I have to ask then, so some of the more, I don't know, negative stuff you have towards, I suppose it would be your great-grandfather?
It would be my grandfather. It would be my grandfather.
So
yes,
even with some of that in here, your family has been supportive?
Yes. It's my grandfather who, I should just probably read a poem.
Yeah,
but,
let's do it.
And my grandmother died of domestic violence when her husband beat her up, basically. So I'm going to read the poem called Calling Grandma on page 24. So it's called Calling Grandma. It's Fort Madison, Iowa, 1939. The old black phone rings with a long, hollow bell sound. Brrring. She picks up the receiver in its base, substantial in her hand, holds it to her ear, and answers. Hello? She can't hear me. On my end, she's been dead 70 years. In her time, she hears nothing but static. Her husband hollers, "Who is it?" "No one, static," she says. He doesn't believe her, gets up and grabs the receiver. "Hello," he asks, "who's this?" I listen as he hears only blackness between us. He hangs up, severs all communication before he will take her away from me forever. So that's another grandmother poem. I did a lot of research, and my mom did not tell me. I always knew my grandmother had died, but I did not know how she died until I was probably almost in my early 30s, and my mom kind of emailed me and then told me the story, which was kind of a shock, and she finally decided that she was going to tell us, which I'm really glad she did. And then I wound up doing a lot of family research, and my grandmother's buried in Fort Madison, Iowa. And I actually found her gravesite, which is in a Catholic cemetery, in a small little church cemetery, and my mom had never knew where she was buried. So we found that. And part of my book tour is we're going to be going to Fort Madison, Iowa, and reading in the library there. So that's just going to be great for that.
I was actually going to ask what brought you, because I think there's a really short poem in here about you finding her headstone, and it made me wonder what brought you to go looking for it.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of family research, and I actually found her obituary, which is in the book. I Googled cemeteries. I knew it was Fort Madison. I had her name, and you just start Googling what gravestones are there. There was a very nice woman who had the cemetery records, who emailed me back and said, yes, she's buried here. She got me the obit. In the newspaper clipping, which I put in here, which, I mean, it's just tons of stuff, and I just, of course, had to go there, and I found her marriage license, a lot of different documents. So there was a whole family tree research thing, which was separate from the poetry going on. But there are a few photos in this book as well. So anybody who's doing family history, a lot of it, you don't know the detail. You have sketches, and you have to kind of make up what it was like. So this Calling Grandma poem was just something that I felt like I could never call her, but I would call her and go through time.
It was both so sweet and had this, well, obviously had a very tough end to it that, every time I read it, I got shivers, and when you read it, same thing. So, that's one of my favorites in the book for sure. Since we're already kind of talking about your grandma and the domestic violence, before I forget, do you want to chat a bit about the very end of the book and some of the extra stuff in here?
Yeah, I put some resources in the back of the book, and there's a page on domestic violence, just because I think it's an important topic, and the awareness is fairly recent. I mean, back in 1939, there was nothing, and you couldn't talk about it, and it wasn't until recently that there's been any, bills, like in 1984, a bill passed through Congress, the Family Violence Prevention Services Act, and it wasn't until the 90s, really, that you could really have a support network with that. So a lot of, why didn't my grandmother leave? Well, she was only 26. My mom was her third child. She was pregnant with a fourth. Women, they didn't have their own jobs or any kind of support. I mean, they're kind of stuck. So it's not like it is today. And so I've got a poem called "I Was Born Without Grandmothers." That can, on page 26, that can give you a little bit of insight about some of my research and my experience in Fort Madison.
Brilliant. Yes.
And I have an epitaph in here called One Can Scarcely Question Tears, which is by Jim Harrison in his novel True North. He's another poet I like a lot. The buildings disappear forever, the church steeples, the train whistle, the swing bridge over the Mississippi River in Fort Madison, Iowa. Did she sit here and look at the river like I am, eating a cheese sandwich, reading a book? Of course she did, my cousin reassures me. Her footsteps are on these streets, the Lee County Courthouse. Her marriage certificate in the thick book names the witnesses to Margaret and Milton's future. 3 kids, the 4th on the way, cut short. The police believed you when you said you fell down the stairs. You were taken by death. Milton fled. Married a woman named Grace, moved the family to St. Paul. Beat Grace up, too, in front of young eyes. Luckily, she survived. Filed for divorce. Second stepmother Lillian, with twin daughters, divorced him too. Mom doesn't remember details. Was never very close to her dad, she says. Understandable, like me, in her own world. Finds a home with a neighbor. Her older brother joins the military. Older sister dies of diabetes at age 30. Never forgave him. You fucking bastard. Will I ever be able to forgive him like Mom? In the church where Margaret attended, I sit in a pew, write in the guest book. Bless the soul of Margaret A. Kepler Lindbergh from her granddaughter with love. This is the church where Mom was baptized Catholic and never told. This is the church where Grandma Margaret is buried in the church cemetery, invisible. Until she found me. The Mississippi submerges the truth from its beginnings until it widens to a mile, spits forth secret tears.
Okay, excellent. And this is the one that I think I was referencing with the until she found me, and I assume that was you finding her.
Yeah, there's an interesting story behind that, too.
If you're willing
There's
to
all
share.
these little stories and how you work history and things. And where Fort Madison is, the Mississippi is actually a mile wide. So it's kind of cool. And there's this railroad swing bridge. And then when I was doing the Googling for finding my grandmother's grave, my cousin in Fort Madison, who my mom was talking to at the time, has been visiting the same cemetery where my grandmother was buried for years, because she had some relatives there. Mm-hmm. And so she's always going there, putting flowers on every couple of weeks or whatever. And then she saw my grandmother's grave, which was just like this flat stone, kind of grass was over it, which was like a few, 50 yards away or something. And she had never, ever noticed it before, like 20 years or whatever. She's been going to the cemetery. She emailed my mom the same day that I found the search with the lady.
No kidding. Wow.
So I don't know, synchronicity, the grandma speaking who knows what, but it's like she wanted to be found. And she said, she just emailed my mom, I never saw it before. We've been going to the cemetery for years, and there was this grave, and it was Margaret's down there, so now I'm going to put flowers on her grave too. And she's just like, and that was like, the same day that I told my mom I found her note, her obituary notice and the gravesite.
Wow.
So I think this book, it's for my parents, but it's for my grandmothers out there.
No, I'm glad that there was an awesome little story to that, because that was one of the, I don't even know why, but it was one of those lines that just caught me, and I circled it, and I was like, I need to ask Jules what this is all about. Yay. So that's a good chunk of the poems in here, but like you mentioned, that a lot of this is also about family more generally, and about your parents passing. And I'm wondering if we can't jump into some of either maybe the early stuff, which is kind of happy. Like Blind Date is super cute for.
The early stuff from my parents, yeah.
Or even jumping into some of the poems towards the end of your parents' lives, because some of that was really good, but really, really sad.
And there's one. The first poem in the book is called Orphans, and I found out this very recently after my parents died, that from my cousin, that my mom told people that she was an orphan, and I was like, "What?" She never told. So you find, and so it's called Orphans. Orphans, Swedish conversations, shut out dad's niece. Assimilate with no help from us, they said. Mom said she was falsely adopted.
Nice.
So,
Love it. Let's see. Before you read some more, I did want to ask, because I have to say that for me, I struggle with a lot of stuff in my family's past, and so that was another reason why I was hesitant to read this, because I was hesitant to kind of be drawn down that path. But I thought, in all honesty, a lot of the latter poems, the ones about your parents passing and your kind of prepping for all of that, kind of reminded me of, and now I'm gonna forget the name of her book, but Margaret Atwood's book, my favorite one of hers, that's poetry. Yeah, Morning in the Burned House. It's kind of about aging and about, well, sex and love that comes with aging. But I don't know, for some reason a lot of the same topics still came up, and I thought it made me feel like I was reading Atwood again, which made me kind of happy.
I love Margaret Atwood. I'm nowhere near her level, but I love her poetry. So, and her novels and everything.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so I was curious, certainly a lot of the poems kind of get to some of your conclusions, but I'm wondering if you could talk more generally about some of the conclusions you came to after all of either the research or the kind of self-reflection towards the end of your parents' passing, in terms of either family or home in general, if that makes sense.
Well, part of the poetic part, I guess it finally made sense when this book came together. And if your audience is writers or poets, and I think the hardest part, you write all these, you just start writing poems, and they're out there, and they may be about one subject area, they may be all over the place. I was writing a lot about this, but I was writing other stuff too. And so then I have to print it all out. You just put it all on the floor, and okay, how do you organize this, and how do you tell the story? What's the arc? And what I learned from my teachers was more like, it is an arc, it tells a story. How are you going to order that and whatever? So by doing that, the poems kind of told me where it was going in a way, and I kind of followed. It's almost like writing a poem is right. It's organizing the book to how do you get this in some kind of physical space that has a beginning and end, that life doesn't really have a beginning and end, but that's part of. So that helped it. Nice. But yeah, and I'm still processing things. The book ends, and that's just kind of decided where I decided to end the book, but that's not to say I'm writing poems, or that still goes on, but it's kind of like this is the process with it. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Then let's see. How about, since we already kind of brought up Margaret Atwood, some of your kind of go-to poets, either that you like to read, or maybe some that kind of either influenced you early on, or that you look to for inspiration, partially so that kind of what this podcast is so that folks can kind of broaden their range. Maybe they don't necessarily like poetry, but they're giving it a shot, or they only like performance poetry, and this isn't into the more traditional, or if you're more traditional and it's an in for some of the performance poetry. So it's kind of a broad range. So kind of some folks that you kind of read or listen to or inspired by that we can kind of look up.
Well, very young, like in high school and stuff, that I grew up went to high school in the late 70s. but like, the Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton, they were, because I was female, I mean, there weren't that many women writers out there then that were being published. So I would go to the library a lot and just, try to find things that were outside of my traditional high school class, the old dead white men kind of stuff, which I liked some of them too, but I couldn't really relate to those. So I wanted to find what are more contemporary poets. I'd never met a poet until college, or I started, because there wasn't any poets in the schools back then and stuff. So you're just trying to read stuff when you go to the library, but something about the intensity of both Plath and Sexton that I like the dark stuff. And
me too.
Yep.
Dark is good.
And that they wrote more about real life and suicide, but also women's issues and just there's a lot of emotion, a little bit confessional, storytelling, narrative stuff. That's kind of what I like anyways, and that's kind of what I write. And or Edgar Allan Poe, who's I have him on my Poetry Playhouse T-shirt and stuff. He's dark. He's kind of a formalist in a way, and a lot of these poets, they're not just poets. They write novels or they do other stuff. So you don't have to do just poetry. I mean, I've written some memoir and essay, but I really want to try to experiment in other forms out there too, or plays or whatever it is. So that's really inspiring that way.
How about some of the more recent folks that you go to?
Yeah, and I'm trying to...
I know, I put everybody on the spot, and nobody can come up with anything until we turn it off.
Well, there's a lot of people in Albuquerque here that I really like. And
feel free to drop their names.
Oh, well, okay. Well, Rich Boucher, because he's just an inspiration with his professionalism and with his just taking it out there and being real surreal. Yeah. And what is it? James Tate is surreal.
Nice, yes.
That out there stuff that's a little bit, anything. I'm kind of into Sistina's and form, and very sensual types of things. There's a couple Sistina people that, of course, I'll get the names later. And then a lot of just, like the poet laureate, Tracy K. Smith is good. She's very real. But I just keep discovering new people, too. And if you just start, just looking through the bookshelves.
Yeah, and that's actually how I've learned some of the more recent stuff I've been reading, is by asking folks
what are you reading right now? Yeah.
Exactly, because I honestly, like I said, I've only been doing this maybe 3 years, even reading poetry, because I was one of the, people who were like, oh, poetry is, not understandable and not fun, so I never read any. And so part of the reason why I asked the question is also so that I can add to my very, so far, small poetry bookshelf.
James Cummins, he's the Sistina guy. But, and, I growing up in Minnesota, there's Robert Bly and Ray Gonzalez teaches at University of Minnesota. He's an El Paso poet. I like him a lot. He's got kind of that surrealist influence. But a lot of people you'll find very strong reactions, either love or hate people. And, but that you just got to find your own. It helps you find your own voice and your own style. Yeah. I guess I read a lot of it. I'm not super stuck on any one person that I like to have it kind of keep filtering
that's
through.
Good, then.
James Dickey is another one. Very intense. he wrote the book Deliverance.
Oh,
That the movie was based on. You have to read the book.
Yeah.
The book is way different.
I think that's going to be the next thing I read. Some of
His stuff is very intense.
good.
Too.
I like intense.
Intense. It's got to be intense.
Yeah.
So.
That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Since we're still kind of talking about you in the broader sense, let's talk a little bit about your playhouse and how that came about and kind of what it is now. So
Yeah, it's Jules Poetry Playhouse, and it's play, and I think poetry should be playful and creative and fun. And it started, I think it was like 2012 over at the factory on 5th, the studios over there. Julie Brocken has a studio there, who's a wonderful artist and poet. And I think I went to Sunday Chatter over there, and then which always has great poets as well in their new location. And there happened to be a studio that was open next door, and it was a very impulsive thing. And I saw this space, very tiny, about the size, half of a bedroom, just like a huge closet. It's kind of what the space was like. And I didn't want it for writing because I can't write in noisy environments. I wanted it more for like events, or more of like a place for play, like a place for poets. And this idea just kind of came into my head, and I wound up renting it that day because the landlord, it was empty, and he goes, "Oh, well, I'm renting it out." It's like, well, it's one of those things like you just follow your gut, like if I either do it or not. And so I was like, okay. And I was thinking of kind of like Pee-wee's Playhouse with that funky stuff.
Awesome.
I love
Yeah.
Pee-wee. And then it's like the little... And so I got it, I rented it, and then painted the floor with this rug and put up funky stuff on the walls. And we had a little TV in there we played, had movie nights with,
Nice.
I had one of my friends who was moving had an extra free TV. It had a little VCR DVD thing. So I had all this stuff kind of that I had accumulated on poets and poetry movies. So we started these movie nights. We have to get that back going again. And then we started inviting, we had an opening, we had an open mic, we had started inviting poets, and it kind of moved out into the hallway. And we just kind of started doing it. And then, it kind of came from, when I was in Minnesota, I worked at the Loft Literary Center, which also started out very small and is now this huge nonprofit organization to support writers with classes and all this stuff. And I guess my idea was a little like that, but just on this tiny scale, and wanted to explore and help me get to know New Mexico poets, because I could invite them. Oh, you want to come to the Playhouse? And we could have talks and hang out. And so it kind of grew from there. And I was in an apartment at the time, and then when I bought a house, it kind of got on hiatus for a while, but we had things at the house, so it kind of moved there. And then when I met my husband, John Roach, we kind of needed more space, so partly for his books and stuff. So we were looking for a place that just one of our friends just kind of mentioned, hey, this place is for rent about a mile from our house. And so the current Playhouse is on Granite between 5th and 6th, kind of just north of downtown. And the front room is a performance space, and then it's got John's office space, and it's got a little kitchen and stuff in the back. So that's what we have right now. And so it worked out partly for the need for space, but also we wanted to continue the performances. And we have I mostly invite poets outside of Albuquerque to read, just because I want to bring that in, because we see Albuquerque poets all the time in Albuquerque. And I thought so they're coming up from, we've had people we've got somebody from Ireland coming in June, Kevin Higgins, and we've had people, our friends, or Minnesota, or California, and sometimes I don't know them. I'll get a friend of a friend, so I'll take a chance on them and bring them in. I usually try to pair them up with somebody or do an open mic to get people out there. So it's a great way to just get to know this great network. And part of being a poet, I think you've got that solitary writing part, but you also have your other poets that you need to associate with to help
Yeah, I
spur that.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the writing itself might be solitary, but nothing good really kind of comes full circle without the community part. And I went to the opening of the one out on Granite, and that's where I first met you.
Yeah, that was crazy.
And John, and I can't even imagine that either one of you recall, because I don't think I stayed long because
it was so crowded.
It was shoulder to shoulder, and I was like,
gosh.
I was so excited for you guys, but man, but it's the cutest little, totally New Mexican sort of house. It's super cute, and I've been to a bunch of events there as well, and no, I'm really glad for it, and I can tell that a lot of folks are who are poets in the area or from around, because it sounds like anytime events do happen, it's pretty hopping. The few that I've been to,
it is small, so it's nice. So like we can fit about 20, 25 people max in there.
Yeah.
So you feel like you have a big crowd, whereas if you had a bigger space, But hey, we've always got at least 10 or 12, which is still good, I think, for poetry readings. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I'm really glad that space is, you guys have that space. So I hope you guys keep that going. Let's see. Why don't we? Let's see. The anthology series. We should probably chat about.
the Poets Speak Anthology.
Yeah, talk a bit about that, because that's kind of a current.
Yeah, there's several of them, and it was John's idea right after the election. With what's his name? I don't even like saying his name, but after the election, my husband John was like very upset. I was upset too, but he kind of channeled his energy into this. Like, I want to do this book called Trumped in this series. So it's an anthology. So we asked for poems from basically, just emailed friends and the Playhouse list and stuff, and anything about so it's very kind of raw out there, what's going on with how people were feeling after the election. And I think we got it out like by January or February, so it was very recent. So now looking back on it, it's like it's kind of like that's what it was before you really even know what's going on. So we have poets from several different states, and we even got somebody from Scotland and the UK. So it's just kind of, people would forward the email around on these submission things. And so John did the editing on that. And then the next volume was called Hers. And I edited that one. And that came out before the whole Me Too thing. That came out like about a year ago. And that was very fun and enlightening for me to put together. That is, of course, I'm biased, but that's my favorite. And to just what people sent in for poems was amazing. And it's things that have been going on since day one. Things with, Lilith and Eve, and all through history and the women's point of view. And we have women and men in there, but it was all about women's issues. So that's that one. And then the next one was water, which is about the environment and the scarcity of water and just how that affects our lives. And then the next one after that's just out is Walls. And that's all kinds of borders, not physical or emotional or different types of borders. And then the one that we're working on right now is called Survival, and that'll be the final one.
Are you guys still taking things, or is that one's kind of locked up
now? Well, it's
locked
kind of
up?
pretty much locked up because we've got to get it out there.
Oh, agreed.
So, but and then we've been donating the profits of these books. They've been selling pretty good, and we had, of course, book launches for all of them in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and then when we travel, seeing friends that are out there. So we wound up donating like $500 to the ACLU from Trumped.
That is awesome.
Another $500 from Hers to the Southwest Women's Law Center. Nice. Water, we've donated to the Indigenous Environmental Network.
Nice.
Walls and Survival, you're going to have donations forthcoming as well. So we're trying to give back to the community with that.
That is awesome. No, and I actually went to I don't think it was the book release, but certainly a book reading for Walls.
Yeah.
And was really excited because I hadn't for some reason heard of the other books in the anthology, so it was really cool to meet a lot of fresh faces in the poetry community, because I think a lot of them either I haven't seen before or aren't really active in the community. So it was really cool to see a lot of new faces.
Yeah, and it's great when it's always different when you read it in a book, but then when you see them read it and who it is, it was just very heartwarming to see that.
Yeah, it was a great evening, and I even have the book here somewhere. Yep, there it is.
Great.
But I haven't had a chance to read it because, I am way behind in my reading.
Yep, I know that feeling.
So let's see, is there any other topics that you wanted to cover before we kind of close things up?
I'll just read a couple more poems.
Absolutely.
It's all about poetry. I think the poems can kind of say more than me talking about things sometimes. But, and the other part of the book is about caretaking. And, as you get older, well, sometimes it happens when younger, but once it all kind of starts coming at you at once sometimes. And, you're unprepared for it, and you just figure one thing out, and then it changes and something else happens you have to figure out. So it's like this whirlwind. But it's partly out there to help people and partly just with my own experience. So do you want me to read a poem from that, maybe? Or
it may be even later in the story than that, but I even wrote in here that my favorite one, I think, is You Can't Come Back.
Oh, okay.
And I have to say it's, again, partially because some of the more recent, and it's 77. A lot of my more recent observations have been, and this is from a song, that there's a difference between going back and going home. And it feels very, very different, where everybody that's still living there, family and others, are like, oh, how's it feel to be home? And I'm like, it doesn't really feel that way much anymore. Yeah. And I'm sure that's not exactly where you were going with this, but that's certainly where my brain went when I read this.
No, that's very good. And it is different. Like when I go back to Minnesota, it's different.
Yeah.
The longer I'm away from there, I've been in Albuquerque since 2011, but the harder it gets to go back and to connect, because you start getting more involved here. And when my parents' house was in Missouri, so we had to sell that, kind of working out of state stuff. The first time I went back there after they died, and you go back into that empty house, that was like a really hard thing to do, but it's different, I have a poem about that too, I think, but yeah, it's, and how time just kind of flies. And so this one's called You Can't Come Back. No, you can't come back. You were cremated. We scattered your ashes in the lake, gave away your clothes. Your shoes are stacked in your garage. House up for sale. I found the lower half of your dentures. They were in the cabinet. It's okay to visit me. What do you miss the most?
And I guess partially, it's that weird sort of, you did really well of having that sense of loneliness and aloneness, but kind of ending it where it's not as, it has an uplifting tone maybe towards the very end of.
And I still talk to my parents all the time in my head, but
as one should,
as you do,
should. I go on lots of hikes here by myself, and I usually end up talking to my grandpa on most of them.
Yeah.
So if you have a favorite one or two on the caregiving side that you wanted to share.
Sure, and then one. This one I like to read, it's called Lipstick, on page 55, because this poem came just very quickly to me, and part of it was just going through things and what things represent. I stole Mom's red lipstick from her bureau drawer, took it after her death. Dad says clean out her stuff from the bathroom. So I do wonder why I would keep her makeup, toss it all except for this tube of drugstore brand red, twist it up from the case, hear her voice whisper from the mirror. My lips are not her lips. My lips ask why, and she answers. Our lips want attention. We are both cynical. She yelled at me for being sassy. She sings out her pain, and I listen. Her lips are bright red like the tomatoes she loved but couldn't eat, too acidic. She washed my mouth out with soap because of a swear word. I try to remember the goodnight kisses tucking me into bed, her last kiss from Dad on the lips in the hospital room. I'm a witness. This shade isn't my color, but I take the lipstick anyway to wear on some special occasion that requires red.
Awesome.
Sometimes it's good to write about tangible things that you see.
Have you worn that lipstick?
I have it as like,
I had to ask.
So, and I could read a sestina too. There's a couple of sestinas in here, which I really like that form because it kind of writes itself in a way, or it puts things together that you wouldn't normally always think of because you're forced to do the words in the order. A sestina is a repetition of poems that has 6 lines and that the end words repeat over and over like this. So it's like this weaving kind of thing that goes on.
I actually really like that form and can never remember the name of it, and then go digging through all of my list of forms.
Oh, yeah, sestina.
All right, excellent. Yeah. Where?
So there's one called Roses on page 46.
Yes.
I read that one a lot, but it kind of put these different things together. Like, so the end words, if you listen to this, are roses, from, put, table, snow, and corn stalks. So those words continually repeat throughout it. Dad picks roses for Mom from the garden to put in a vase on her table, but by the end of April, the snow swept up the corn stalks. The latest anyone with corn had seen snow. The roses covered the doorstep the snow didn't get to, and from Dad's parents' kitchen table, he looked out at his dad, putting the stalks upright. He put the yellowed leaves of stalks that would come back, tabled around after the sun rose, again blooming, going from spring and planting to snow. Within a week of snow, it melted, and the corn was off. Put back on track, from seasons into growing corn, knee-high by July 4th, rising up for glory, tables of produce, sweet corn tabled under melting snow. But we can't eat roses. We can only put them out as a memorial to lost corn, lost names, lost graves, from one city to the next, from moving the family farmhouse table, moving the whole house surrounded by cornfields where little boys grow up to shovel snow and fix semi-trucks, work construction, put food on the table with a vase of roses in the middle for Mom, covered from snow, her table set for guests that never came, put out the corn, the butter, the salt, the roses.
Awesome. Yay. I love that
So
one.
it kind of has like that rhythm,
Yeah.
to it.
I love it. All right. Did you want to share any more, or let's see?
And then, this is a point of view from the daughter, or a woman's point of view with her parents too, and so it's my perspective of what my parents might have gone through. And then I do have one poem called Pause on page 63 that's actually about menopause, and a lot of that doesn't get written a lot about. One of these days I want to do an anthology with that.
You should. You should.
And of course my mom and her generation, they never talked about anything, so you have no clue. So so that of course is going on. Pause. Me, no, pause, Dad is a naked stranger standing in my living room, home care nurse Brian bathing him. Insiders, we rarely leave the house. When I go outside as an older woman, I turn invisible. Dad is desperate, gasping for air, for my voice, rings the intercom in the middle of the night. No, Dad, it's only a dream. I'm your daughter. Hallucinations. Me. No. Pause. Migraine needles in my head. Fire flashes burning, bleeding. The doc says, yes, the lab results came back. I'm officially in menopause. Pause. Spinning.
Awesome. Excellent. What else you got?
So yeah, I write a lot. A lot of my work is very narrative and very stories.
I think that's probably why I like it, because I started writing short stories and then
good.
moved into the poetry. And yeah, I think a lot of the poetry that I end up landing on and enjoying tends to be narrative. Yeah, because I like the storytelling.
Yeah.
I don't even like country music that much, but I like country music that has those stories, because they tend to be really good at like playing with words and the weird stories. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And I could read one more that's kind of a little more upbeat. Well, it's kind of towards the end of the book. I write about food a lot too, and I teach a class called Food as Metaphor.
That's actually how I met you.
Oh,
it was
great, yeah.
One of the book conferences here in town, probably.
Oh, that's
like,
right, at that
like
the
2013
writers'
or something.
conference.
Yeah, and you did that, and that was my first. That was just shy of when I was getting into poetry, so you kind of like started it.
Oh, well, that was a lot of fun. I hope you had fun.
I did. Actually, I think one of the poems I wrote in that was based off of like a grocery list.
Yes, like grocery shopping or refrigerators or food is a great thing to write about.
For about 2 years, that was my favorite poem that I had written.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Well, you could share it even.
Oh, if only I could remember where it is now. You put me on the spot and I wouldn't be able to find it.
Well, I always say if you want to write about something, like write about food. Or,
it works really well.
Because it's tangible. We have so many associations with it. So this poem, I thought, refrigerator, I've got to write about the refrigerator, because it's just like weird stuff. And everybody has a refrigerator. Yeah. And if you want to know what somebody's like,
you go for the refrigerator.
Look in the refrigerator, like you can tell a lot, So this is in my parents' refrigerator. In my parents' refrigerator, Mom kept health emergency info in a Ziploc bag, curled up between the condiments, as if a paramedic would choose to look there first. She must have read it in a magazine. I discovered the paper still there while emptying the fridge after she died. When Dad came to live with me, I stuffed my freezer with food he liked. A quick meal after my work, he would be waiting. After he died, I wondered how long I should hang on to frozen Texas toast and Marie Callender's meat lasagna, items not on my grocery list, but I didn't want to go to waste. I worked these items into my meals alone, chatting with Dad about my day. 2 years later, the frozen strawberries are still there in the freezer door. Spoiled, I toss them out and make room for my life.
Yeah, I think I had a bunch of notes next to that one too, because, I love it. There's so many that I really like in this one. Yay.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's a really sad book in a way, but in a way it's also, something that you can relate to people. Well, hopefully, I don't know if they relate too much, but it's out there to help. And I think you have a little bit of sense of humor in poetry too.
Yeah, and sure, a lot of the content or the topic is touching, if not, it's sad, but there's seems to be a certain sense of hope in a lot of it, like the one you just read, where it's kind of moving on, but at the same time being okay with it in a way. So, no, I can only assume that folks who have been through a lot of the same stuff have found this comforting that have read it.
Yeah, I hope so. So, I know I found comforting, reading about things, and so when you're kind of, out there, things come at you so fast that it's all friends helping you out, or how should I do this, or so I've put some resources in the book on that too. So
yeah. So of course, like everything else, I'll put links in there for this, and certainly if you do, or when you do purchase this book, give that back couple of pages a look over, because there is a lot of resources in there about a lot of the topics that are in her book. So then, anything else before we get to the icebreaker poems?
Okay. So I've been having fun with Jules Poetry Playhouse, and my favorite part is just meeting other poets, and it's just not enough time. I work a full-time day job, so it's good to know that, poets have to kind of survive. So you can still write and work and do, go on with your life, and you just have to kind of squeeze in time for writing. Yeah. I've been doing that poem a day thing, and it's more of the discipline than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And you helped me do my poem of the day today.
Yay.
But even if you just spend 10 minutes a day, something,
Yeah, and I have a new job, and same as with most poets, I also have a full-time job that is neither this nor poetry.
Right.
I actually felt this is the first year I've done it, and I've fallen behind.
And that's okay. But it goes back and forth. And you get dry spells and good spells, and there's always projects, and there's never enough time. But you do the poetry. So
it's true. So I'm going to do mine first, because as with most, I really liked yours more than mine. But we did a cinquain, and the version of it that we did was just syllable based. So 5 lines, first syllable being 2, and then 4, and then 6, and then 8, and then back to 2. So then mine is baseball, seasons too brief, like life, you train in spring. Still, your best chance is an extra inning.
Yeah, it's good for isotopes coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, so mine it's journey to the ether, radio waves rise up, settle like dust blowing tumbleweeds. Who's there?
Yay. Awesome. I love it. Love it. And it's been blustery here in Albuquerque, so.
Yeah, all the wind, so.
Jules, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Rene. Yeah, you make it a lot of fun. Time just flies, so like when you're writing poetry.
True. Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to thank my guest, Jules Nyquist, again for coming on. Jules really is a cornerstone of the New Mexico poetry community as both an advocate for creativity and the written and spoken word, but also as a poet and creative mind. You can find Jules's books and work all over the place, including her website, julesnyquist.com. I will have all information in the liner notes in terms of finding her website, her books, and some of the other pieces that she edited that we spoke about. I did want to say that this may be one of the last episodes until September. As some of you know, I tied for first in the Albuquerque Slam Championship to be part of a 4-person team to represent Albuquerque in Chicago in August. To make sure that I am ready and that my team is ready, this show may go on hiatus, but know that I already have several poets lined up in the fall, including at least one that I met during my trip to Connecticut on the plane. She saw a semicolon tattoo of mine, and we got talking, and I already have her book and have started reading it and can't wait to speak with them this fall. Again, this may be the last episode for a while, but by September we will be back up and running. That doesn't mean we won't have random shows in between now and then. I would love to, but they may be a bit shorter and a bit less or a bit more off the cuff. But this is not goodbye so much as so long for now. And until then, stay safe.